All right, today we're diving into a really powerful concept called Al-Bakhs. Think of it as the hidden domino effect cost that kicks in whenever we diminish the value of other people. And trust me, it's a cost that eventually we all end up paying. So let me start by asking you this. Have you ever poured your heart into a project only to have a coworker take all the credit? Or maybe you've been in a negotiation where you just knew you were getting a raw deal. That feeling, that sting of being unfairly undervalued, that's exactly what we're getting into today. It's a universal feeling, and it has a name. So what is Bakhs Salaf, really? Let's break it down and get a solid definition. Okay, so Al-Bakhs, at its heart, is the act of unjustly, unfairly reducing someone's rights. And the key word here is unjustly. But what's really fascinating is that this isn't just about tangible things, like money or property. It covers moral rights too. We're talking about the act of making someone or something less than what it rightfully should be. And this isn't some new idea, not at all. It's got really deep roots. We can go back centuries to the scholar Al-Raghib El-Isfahani, who just put it so perfectly. He said, "Bakhs is to reduce a thing by way of injustice." It's that simple, yet so profound. The injustice is the whole point. It's not just any reduction. It has to be a wrongful one. Now, you might be thinking, okay, so it's just cheating, right? Well, yes and no. Cheating is part of it for sure, but Al-Bakhs is so much bigger, so much more all-encompassing than that. To really get a feel for how broad this is, let's compare it to something more specific, a term called At-Tatfif. Now, Tatfif is that classic, small-scale injustice. Think of a merchant rigging the scales to sell you less than you paid for. That's Tatfif. But Al-Bakhs? That's the whole system. It's not just about cheating with weights and measures. It's about diminishing any right, whether it's something you can hold in your hand or something intangible like dignity. It's the entire spectrum of injustice, from the smallest cheat to the biggest betrayal. Okay, so if this concept is so huge, what does it actually look like day to day? Let's get into some real-world examples. First up, it can hit you right where you can feel it, in your material rights. We're talking about the tangible stuff, the things you can literally see and count. And this goes way beyond just simple cheating in a deal. You've got things like al-Ghulul, that's embezzlement, stealing from public funds. Then there's al-Ihtikar, where a corporation might hoard a product to jack up the price. Or anaj, which is like using fake bids at an auction to artificially inflate the value. And get this, even something as common as al-Mats, just delaying payment to a contractor or a freelancer, that's a form of Bakhs. Why? Because you're diminishing their right to be paid promptly for the work they've already done. But remember, it's not just about money and things. This is where the concept gets really deep. Bakhs also targets our moral rights, our civil rights. And this is where it really cuts to the core of who we are. We're talking about denying someone their basic right to feel safe, or suppressing their freedom to think for themselves, to express their ideas. It's about undermining fundamental civil rights, like equal opportunity. When that happens, you're basically telling a whole group of people that their right to participate in society is worth less than someone else's. That's bias on a massive scale. So why? Why does this happen? People don't just wake up and decide to diminish others. Well, this behavior doesn't just spring out of a vacuum. There are some really clear root causes. It really boils down to three main things. First, you've got a weak moral deterrent. That's when that little voice inside, that conscience, is either ignored or just isn't there. Second, there's overwhelming greed, just a raw, intense desire for more wealth, more power, that makes exploiting others feel like a smart move. And third, and this is a big one, you have systemic tyranny. This is when the people in charge have so much power, with zero accountability, that diminishing the rights of others just becomes business as usual. There's this incredible saying that just paints such a vivid picture of greed's destructive power. The idea is that a person's greed for money and status is more damaging to their spirit than two hungry wolves set loose on a flock of sheep. Just imagine that for a second. That's not just a small character flaw, it's a rampaging, destructive force. And that is the kind of engine that drives people to diminish others for their own gain. All right, so we know what Bakhs is and we know what causes it. But what's the end game? What happens to a society when this kind of behavior becomes the norm? Well, this is where we see the truly devastating hidden cost. It's like a series of dominoes, one tipping over the next in a catastrophic chain reaction. It all starts when Bakhs just becomes common. It's just how the world works, people say. Then, because of all this exploitation, a super wealthy class emerges, and the gap between the rich and poor becomes a chasm. What happens next? Well, the people who are constantly being shortchanged, they lose hope, they lose motivation. The whole economy starts to grind to a halt. Of course, this breeds resentment and hostility between the different classes. And the final domino? A society that's torn apart by infighting and crippled by economic stagnation, well, it becomes incredibly weak and totally vulnerable to collapse. This old quote really captures that idea in such a stark, poetic way. When the measure is diminished, the rain is withheld. It's this powerful idea that deep moral corruption has real, tangible consequences. A society that practices this kind of injustice will find itself becoming barren, not just socially, but as the metaphor implies, maybe even literally. And all of this brings the focus right back to us, doesn't it? It all comes down to a question of value. So I'll leave you with this to think about. In what small, maybe even hidden ways might we be diminishing others in our own lives today? At work, in our communities, even in our everyday conversations. And if we are, how might we also be diminishing the value of our entire society and in the end, diminishing ourselves?